It's one of the most pleasantly demented things I've ever read. Better than food, man. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Good to see you. Hope you're all doing very well. Excuse the drab background. Still unpacking all this stuff. Got to get some bookshelves going on here. If anybody has any good ideas for like DIY bookshelves or something interesting that is kind of cost effective but would, make a good background, hit me up. In the meantime, this review is for Rickian Bananowicz. Rickian Bananowicz from Twitter. I hope that's his real name. He requested In the Penal Colony by Kafka. Many people requested Kafka. Many people have been requesting Kafka since the beginning of the show, and he is very overdue. So finally, let's talk about a Kafka short story. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, rather than reviewing one of the stories you've no doubt heard about relentlessly, the Trial, the Metamorphosis, I'd wager, this is just as good an introduction, I feel, and a quick read. An example par excellence of the Kafkaesque nightmare. You can find In the Penal Colony, well, you can probably find the PDF online, or you can find it in the complete stories, of which there are several translations. I'm not sure which is the best. This was the one by Willa and Edmund Muir, and the other one was by Joachim Nugroschel, which he's one of my favorite translators. I gotta get that. I've made the sweeping generalization before that many of the greatest authors have dad issues, but no other author may have more documented difficulties with their father than Franz Kafka. Though I'm going to touch on that in this review, of course, because it's pervasive and inescapable. I'm uncomfortable just reducing him to, that author who had problems with his dad. Nobody wants to just be remembered for that. So when I review more of him in the future, we'll go a little bit deeper into that. Though it is, of course, a giant component, if not the iconic element of his work, as you'll find themes of authority, crippling guilt, and punishment pervasive in all of his stories. But if you research a little bit and watch stuff like this documentary with the British author and Kafka fan Will Self, he touches on that notion. That of course there was much more to the man than this all-consuming, paralyzing insecurity. Apparently in person he was extremely funny. And this definitely comes out in a lot of his writing, even in translation. Even this short story, which is dark as hell, has these moments of brilliant humor. That being said, Kafka, who was from Prague, was known for having a lifelong terror of his father, stemming from this feeling of inadequacy growing up in his shadow, and never receiving approval. Instead of being a writer, he studied as a lawyer and worked in insurance. By many accounts, Kafka had a short, stressful life, and famously ordered all of his works be destroyed after his death. This order was disobeyed, and not long after his departure, he was considered a magnificent writer, one of the most influential. Horrific, arbitrary judgment is a constant in his novels, says Alain Baton, the School of Life segment on Kafka. And this short story is one of the best examples of that. In the Penal Colony was written in 1914 and published in 1919. This was around the time of World War I, which of course, like it's documented graphically in Storm of Steel, saw a massive increase in technology designed to slaughter. Machinery that was created with the intent of tearing apart human flesh, which is exactly the intention of the central apparatus we are introduced to in Kafka's short story. "It's a remarkable piece of apparatus," said the officer to the explorer, and surveyed with a certain air of admiration the apparatus which was, after all, quite familiar to him. Kafka has brilliantly set up the whole idea in the very first line. In the Wikipedia article on this short story, there was a mention that Octave Mirbeau's The Torture Garden may have been an influence on this. To me personally, Kafka's is much more humorous in tone, while Mirbeau luxuriously meditates on aesthetic and the juxtapositions of beauty, violence, and suffering. Still, amazing book, very different though. But it's kind of the same scenario, this island, this traveler, this explorer, seeing these untold horrors, judgment, violence, condemnation, all of these themes. So a traveler has come to an island to witness the execution of a condemned man who's being held in chains by a soldier. It's kind of like a desert island. There's just like desert everywhere. They're in the sand. And conducting the ceremony is this demented officer, inspecting this huge execution device and informing the traveler as he does so what's to come. This execution device kind of looks like a giant four-post bed, except it's as if there was this platform, 4 rods, another platform held up by them, and dangling from the top platform, there's all of these needles. They look like knives, The idea is the person lies naked on the bottom platform is strapped down, and these needles and knives, they come down and they tattoo this script of judgment on the condemned. And they do it for 12 hours until he's dead, right? Inscribed to death. One of Kafka's persistent themes is horrific forms of persecution and judgment, usually pertaining to individuals who weren't even aware of their crimes. You can see that in his most well-known story, The Metamorphosis, where Mr. Samsa wakes up to the realization that he's become this hideous vermin. And even in this story, the condemned man doesn't even speak the same language as the officer, so he's just trying to figure out what the officer is saying to the traveler the entire time. He has no idea what's going on. And the traveler comes to realize that the condemned man has had no trial. There was no chance for him to defend himself. The officer is, of course, the most terrifying character in the story. The purest literary expression of a sociopath. Kind of this cheery guy who prioritizes manners and restraint, yet acts with total ignorance of either compassion or empathy. For him, it's not innocent until proven guilty. He proudly informs the traveler, "My guiding principle is this: guilt is never to be doubted." The obvious message driven home, of course, is the importance of a solid judicial system, based on innocence until proof of guilt. The deeper idea explored concerns the compulsion to inflict pain and agony, even at the expense of oneself. Pure evil, basically. And this is before World War II, where many of Kafka's relatives were murdered by the Nazis. Says the officer regarding the machine, "Of course, the script can't be a simple one. It's not supposed to kill a man straight off, but only after an interval of, on an average, 12 hours. The turning point is reckoned to come at the 6th hour. So there have to be lots and lots of flourishes around the actual script. The script itself runs around the body only in a narrow girdle. The rest of the body is reserved for the embellishments." The officer is in love with his own ideals of slow, methodical torture. Taking life from others is what gives his meaning. For him, it's not whether the condemned man is guilty. It's whether or not the machine will be allowed to work its ingenuity. And this reminds me of the concept of pure evil, which Jordan B. Peterson mentioned. The idea of pure evil is that in order to be absolutely evil, you have to want to do something cruel or inhuman so much that it begins to destroy everything, including yourself. So that not only are you hurting others, but you're hurting yourself in the process. There went the light. This is what the officer decides to do when he hears the opinion of the explorer, which of course is not in favor of the apparatus because he's horrified. The officer reveals that the new commandant is not a fan of the device, and the officer is infatuated with the ways of the old commandant, and he gushes over it. How we all absorbed the look of transfiguration on the face of the sufferer, how we bathed our cheeks in the radiance of that justice, achieved at last and fading so quickly. What times these were, my comrade. The officer had obviously forgotten whom he was addressing. He had embraced the explorer and laid his head on his shoulder. The explorer was deeply embarrassed. So it is a little funny. More than a little. But it's black humor. The officer is getting a lot out of this, right? As you can see, he's seduced by the 12-hour torture, viewing it as an experience almost of religious martyrdom for the condemned. So in order to keep with his idealism and manifest that idea of evil once more, after learning of the traveler's disapproval and seeing the end of his death machine on the horizon, he sacrifices himself. He frees the condemned man who is still living, and who by now has made friends with the soldier in this odd moment of humor, which is in many ways why the story works so well. To be completely humorless is to be inhuman, and Kafka's humor is utilized as a counterpoint to the suffering, condemnation, and horror implied by the rest of the morbid scenario. The officer seeks out that which he's witnessed so many times, stripping down, strapping up, and having the script be just written onto his flesh by all the needles. However, the machine is so broken that it begins to malfunction, and instead of writing the beautiful script on the officer's skin, the machine just begins stabbing him. Without Kafka's wit, the stories would be infinitely more depressing. Though this kinetic absurdity creates an unstable, unpredictable literary environment. It's one of the most pleasantly demented things I've ever read. It'll take you an hour. It's easy. Better than food. You're gonna love it. Always remember, life is far too short to read bullshit. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're doing well. It was great to see you, of course. If you want to help the show out, you can support at patreon.com/booksarebetterthanfood. Get access to the private vlog, recommendations of all sorts, information on stuff going on behind the scenes, and also this new book club thing where I'm going to announce the book before I review it so y'all can get an early start. We can all discuss, talk about it, make the review better. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're doing really well. Have a great night. Take care. Ciao.